You're listening to Big World Network.
Phineas Frakture and the Curse of Steamhotep. Episode 4. Written by Joseph Gatch. Read by Michael Young. Whatever it was, it did not smell good. The aroma emanating from the kitchen was akin to pickled cabbage, with a hint of ammonia. Phineas put his papers down on the dining-room table, which was actually more of a repository for pieces of wayward experiments. Every morning Mrs. Popkiss would clean the mess, and by the evening it would be filled with more junk than it had the previous day. "Mrs. Popkiss!" Phineas shouted. "What died in here?" The elderly housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, wearing her cooking apron and a gas mask. "It's called dinner, sir," came the muffled response. "The goose that you accidentally shot with that wavy gun thingy you were working on the other day. I didn't think that it should go to waste." "But why does it smell like that? It doesn't smell like goose at all." She raised the mask and crinkled her nose. "I don't know, but it has turned the most brilliant shade of orange as well. I don't think that we should eat it." "Probably just as well. Cold-cut sandwiches it is, then." Phineas went back to the table and spread out his drawings and notes. "Damn," he said, realizing that there was a notebook missing from his collection. Once he had arranged them in the most logical order to his liking, he pulled out another notebook and began taking notes on his notes. Phineas's mind went into a unique mode, filtering out everything irrelevant to what he was doing. He didn't even notice that Mrs. Popkiss had left his sandwich in front of him. He picked it up and ate while he worked, not even acknowledging its appearance and subsequent disappearance. Later, he would wonder why there was a crumb-covered plate left on his drawings, and, more than likely, blame William for his slovenly ways. In the far-off distance of reality, his mind registered the front bell ringing, and an unusual scent of lavender wafting through the room. Phineas was jolted back to the land of the cognizant, as Abigail moved a drawing to put down a cup of coffee. "Thank you," he said, taking it and downing it in one gulp. "That was mine, you cretin," she said, though her annoyance only lasted a moment, as Mrs. Popkiss handed her another cup in anticipation of this very scenario. "So sorry," Phineas replied. He looked at Abigail in confusion. "When did you get here? And why are you dressed like that?" Abigail straightened her evening gown. "Do you like it? I wore it to dinner tonight." "Dinner? You are dressed a bit formal for dinner with Patterson." "Well, not exactly. I was with Kavanaugh." Phineas's hand jerked at the mention of the name, and his pencil went flying across the room. Mrs. Popkiss, who had narrowly missed as she was leaving the room, retrieved it and returned it to the table. "Why were you out with that sot?" Phineas asked. "Because he asked, and you were busy attending to your mummy. Besides, you wouldn't have gone even if we had asked you. William wasn't feeling well, so he went home for the evening." "So you were alone?" "Yes." "With Kavanaugh?" "Yes." "And you had—" "A wonderful time," Abigail replied. "He was a perfect gentleman, so dashing and exciting." "Why? Does it matter that I would go out with another gentleman? It's not like we are together, is it? You've said over and over again that we are not together, so why shouldn't I enjoy another's company?" Phineas looked down at his drawings, furrowing his brow. He suddenly stood up and grabbed his coat. "Excuse me, I need to go. Mrs. Popkiss, don't wait up for me. I may be a while." He dashed out the door, leaving the two women to stare after him. Abigail was the first to break the silence. "Too much?" "Too much," the housekeeper replied. "I fear that you might have broken something." "I'm afraid of that as well." Mrs. Popkiss began cleaning the cups from the table. "So you had a nice time tonight?" Abigail dropped her head to the table with a loud thud. "Oh, Miss Popkiss," she exclaimed, "it was simply awful." All he did was talk about himself. Everywhere he'd explored and all his adventures, all about him. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. It was like I wasn't even there. I will never call Phineas pompous ever again. He holds nothing on that egomaniac. She lifted her head. All I could think about was running away and finding Phineas. I can't tell you how much I prefer his silence to the ravings of someone like Kavanaugh. Maybe you should tell him that. When he shows up again, that is. Do you think he is all right? I'm not sure, dear. You seem to have traversed into uncharted waters. He's been secure in your companionship for so long that he takes it for granted. He'll be fine once that mind of his processes all of this. Either that or his head will explode like so many of his experiments. And that is not a mess I look forward to cleaning up. That's what I'm afraid of. After we escaped from the Dolomite, it seemed that he was moving in a new direction in our relationship. Now it's like he's regressed even further than before. Give him time, dear. Maybe another rooster in the henhouse is exactly what he needs. I should be going. Abigail collected her coat and opened the door. Let me know when he returns. I will send word the moment he is back. Thank you, Mrs. Popkiss. Have a good night. You too, dear. The housekeeper waited until Abigail had left before she began tidying up the table. As she was straightening the papers, Mrs. Popkiss glanced over the ones that Phineas had been looking at just before he left. I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Wishful thinking on our parts, I guess. But, oh, my dear boy, what on earth have you gotten yourself into this time? The papers contained a series of rubbings from the sarcophagus. Along the margins, Phineas had partially translated them. The passage that caught her eye read, "For how can one with eternal life rest in peace?"
You're listening to Big World Network.